Is that okay?
Yep. There we go. We're on. Yep.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Karl. So today it's our great pleasure to have Mao Albarracin, who's going to talk to us about. Thanks, Maxwell. So everybody's very excited, and I'm also very excited. And Mao is going to tell us about enacting fluid gender scripts. Over to you.
Thank you. So in today's presentation, we'll be exploring a range of interconnected topics. Did you guys want me to introduce myself? I feel like you introduced me, but I don't necessarily need to extra introduce myself.
Why don't you, Mao? That would be great.
Okay. So my name is indeed Mao Albarracin. I'm doing a cognitive computing PhD, and I've done a master's in gender and sexology. So this is a combination of these two approaches, and I'll be presenting specifically two papers that you can see here that we wrote with Maxwell, Axel Constant, Karl Friston, and Pierre Poirier. And so, as I said, we'll be exploring a range of interconnected topics coming from these two papers, but they're focused on our understanding of social scripts and their profound impact on our society's evolving perception of gender. We're going to have an introduction on the concept of scripts, their role in guiding social behavior. We'll discuss gender studies, the fluidity of gender roles. We'll present our primary aim, which is to propose a novel, enactive-ecological framework for understanding cultural social scripts. And so we're going to discuss interpersonal negotiation within the cultural niche. We'll try to introduce active inference as a new way of understanding and modeling scripts and discuss its potential to really help us understand social structures and the fluidity of scripts specifically. We'll also try to explore the practical implications of this synthesis. We're also going to explore how active inference can really cash out through this formalism, how gender evolves as a fluid script, and how new identities can emerge from this. So, the presentation is going to be a little bit cyclical, which is meant to align the content with the form. So, bear with me through this. The concept of scripts is not only integral to the social sciences, but also finds significant relevance, it feels like, artificial intelligence and psychology. Scripts represent organized sequences of expected behavior or events, or at least that's one of the most common definition of it. They serve as a form of cognitive blueprint or a recipe for action in specific situations, which guide individual responses and actions. In their various forms, they play a key role in predicting and explaining human behavior across a wide array of contexts. They help us navigate social situations, they drive our understanding of social norms, and they influence our expectations about how others will behave. When we talk about gender studies, they take on an even more nuanced role. They inform our understanding of gender norms, roles, behaviors, our perceptions, and our interactions, which are based on societal expectations and individual identities. In recent times, we've seen a significant shift in societal understanding and acceptance of gender fluidity. As notions of genders have evolved beyond the traditional binary, it becomes increasingly important to scrutinize the guiding principles, the scripts that inform our gendered interactions. Scripts, particularly strong scripts, are deeply embedded within our societal fabric. They guide our behavior, and they set the stage for our expectations. But our societal landscape evolves, and so too does our need for a more nuanced understanding. So in the face of this rising awareness, we find ourselves at a junction where closer examination of gender scripts is not only beneficial, but essential, especially given the political landscape that a lot of us find ourselves in today. So, let's go back to scripts. They are a typical sequence of actions and responses that we learn and internalize over time, which guides our behavior in various situations. From a cognitivist perspective, scripts are internal mental representations that guide our actions in familiar settings. For instance, when you enter a coffee shop, a mental script tells you to get in line, place your order, wait for your drink, pay, and then leave with your purchase. In contrast, the ecological perspective views scripts as perception action loops, shaped by our interaction with environmental, cultural, and biological cues, which emphasize their dynamism and adaptability. We perceive our environment, decide on an action, and execute that action. This process is influenced by various cultural and biological cues. But importantly, scripts, cultural scripts, are fluid. They evolve, they adapt over time based on societal changes. For example, a fast food restaurant script, which began as a simple sequence of ordering at the counter, has branched out into various variants like drive-thrus, mobile ordering, which demonstrates the fluidity and adaptability of scripts, which can be maintained within a single cluster. Our primary aim today is to propose an enactive ecological framework to analyze cultural scripts. This approach considers scripts not just as abstract guidelines, but as active, embodied, and situated processes that individuals use to navigate their cultural environment. Through this, we aim to link the interpersonal negotiation informed by these scripts to the broader concept of a cultural niche, the socially constructed space that individuals occupied with its distinct roles, expectations, and opportunities. So we will refer to this concept as a landscape of cultural affordances, which is a term that's interesting to remember when we get to the skilled intentionality framework. And it encapsulates the range of potential actions, behaviors, and interactions that a cultural environment offers to its individuals at large. So if we consider our discourse on gender and scripts, two key concepts are paramount. We talk about enactment and we talk about affordances. If we start with enactment in the context of gender, enactment refers to the process by which individuals actively perform or enact their gender roles. This is not an isolated phenomenon, but it's shaped and influenced by continuous interactions with the surrounding environment. And that brings us to the second concept of affordances. They refer to the opportunities or possibilities for actions that our environment offers us. These affordances shape our pre-reflexive consciousness and guide our action even before we consciously reflect upon them. They are the building blocks of our interaction with the world, including our gender enactment. The interaction between enactment and affordances is continuous and dynamic. As we navigate through our environment, we're constantly engaging with affordances and enacting our roles accordingly. So to better grasp the concept of affordances, we can take a look at an everyday example. So you picture a red traffic light, it affords us the action of stop. Similarly, a phone affords us the ability to call for emergency services. There are cultural affordances, possibilities for action that are not only shaped by our physical environment, but also by our cultural milieu and the significance we put into certain symbols. We can think of cultural affordances as part of a sensory motor cultural affordance loop. This loop represents the continual interactions between our actions and the possibilities offered by the environment. We encounter an affordance, we act, and then this action influences the next round of affordances we encounter. Think back to the coffee shop. This continuous loop is heavily shaped by our cultural niche. This notion of affordances and their enactment also ties into the hierarchy of generative models. In this context, affordances can be seen as part of the environment that our perceptual and cognitive systems attempt to model. These models in turn guide our actions by shaping what affordances we perceive and how we respond to them. But each model is imbricated into the next, such that scripts are not only at one level, they can exist at multiple levels of various timescales. So within our framework, gender is conceived as, the enactment of culturally gendered sensory motor affordance loops. Simply put, individuals perform or enact their gender roles by engaging with the possibilities for actions, the affordances that their culture offers. For instance, consider the cultural affordances linked to traditional males or female roles in a given society. Think of the difference in parental roles for both females and males within a binary matrix. The relationship to fatherhood for men is one that has drastically different implications than the one to motherhood. And this has effects on the affordances that are given to a father or to a mother, and this can be completely encapsulated by our institutions. So to further unpack this, we can cast scripts as clusters of nested scripts. The scripts guide behavior across different settings. For example, within the work script, you could find nested scripts for professional communication, meeting etiquette, workplace attire. These scripts provide a framework for expected behavior in various professional scenarios. And so when individuals fail to embody these scripts accurately, there can be social consequences leading to stigma or exclusion. So consider the consequences of violating the professional communication script at work. Consider the effect of writing the wrong punctuation in your email, or how much you have to think about how many exclamation marks you put into the sentences consecutively, which is a problem I often struggle with. So to bring this closer to the context of gender, we can look at public restrooms. These spaces offer gendered affordances, like for instance, I don't know how to say this word in English, but the urinoir is something that's not afforded to women.
The urinal.
Urinals, thank you. So urinals for men afford standing up and have specific social etiquettes. You cannot stand next to another man and then talk. Whereas in a women's bathroom, it doesn't matter really where you sit, and you definitely talk in the stalls, which is something that we recently discovered is clearly a gender difference in the context of bathrooms. So these spaces afford gendered affordances, which provide different possibilities for actions based on the gendered pole an individual embodies. This can be as straightforward as which restroom is one expected to use. So individuals perceive and interact with the world based on their gender identity. It's not just about enacting sensory affordance loops. It also involves elements like culturally gendered bodies, narratives, and the communication of social identity. These gendered aspects are all consequences of enacting culturally gendered sensory motor affordance loops. We internalized gendered scripts, and these scripts in turn influence our perception of the world and our place in it. Thus, our gender identity significantly influences how we perceive and enact scripts in our daily lives. So importantly, within this framework, there is room for what we term reappropriation. This is where individuals can enact their roles differently, essentially resisting or reinterpreting the normative scripts. Butler often refers to drag queens for this very specific purpose. It's a powerful mechanism for individual expression and a critical part of understanding gender fluidity, which we will delve into a little bit later. So active inference here really fits this picture when paired with the skilled intentionality framework, which provides a detailed, model to analyze scripts in the context of broader social structures. The skilled intentionality framework is a theoretical model that explains how organisms interact with their environment, and it posits that organisms actively seek out and utilize what their environment offers to meet their goals, aka affordances. And here we can start to see how this maps very nicely to your preferences and your policies that would be more likely to lead you to your preferences. The skilled intentionality framework, integrating ideas from enactivism, ecological psychology, and the free energy framework, offers a robust foundation to understand and analyze scripts. Under this model, scripts are not static, they can evolve due to the polysemic nature of fields of affordances and cultural shifts, reinforcing the adaptability inherent in active inference's explanation of behavioral dynamics. So this notion counters psychological theories that suggest that scripts exist solely within individual minds, and instead proposes that social structures emerge from socially organized psychological phenomena. It transcends these notions of scales. A central element to the skilled intentionality framework is the concept of skilled agents becoming attuned to the relevant affordances in their environment through learning and adaptation. And this attunement involves a selective openness to the environment, where an agent's attention is guided towards certain affordances and away from others based on their needs, skills, or bodily states. This concept is embodied in the notion of fields of relevant affordances. So remember, we have a landscape, and now we're going a little bit shorter into fields, representing all affordances that are pertinent to an agent at a given time. This is how we can leverage the active inference framework to explain the emergence of coordinated group behavior. Through active inference, we have been able to show how shared generative models can lead to convergence in behaviors within large cultural human ensembles. In this setting, the environment and its constituents become mutually predictable, leading to the formation of a cultural or social group. And we understand a cultural or social group as a collection of agents with shared cultural traits, beliefs, or expectations about the sensory consequences of their actions. So these shared generative models are learned based on sensory observation from the environmental's causal structure and processes. Variations in culture are accounted for by differences in state transition narratives, which lead to differentially parametrized generative models and thus different enacted policies. This means variations in outcome sequences stem from environment-modifying actions. We can use the concept of deontic value. So this represents an attribute of the posterior of a policy dictating which course of action to pursue upon sensing certain specific outcomes. So by combining the standard inferential A, B, C, and D matrices in deontic pathway to policy selection, we can discuss policy selection within the context of cultural group dynamics that form via shared generative models. And so we leverage the dual aspect of active inference to dispel the tension and apparent contradiction between internalist and externalist renditions of the script construct. Active inference can accommodate the strong and weak modalities of the script construct in a systemic and principled manner. It also helps us understand the structure and function of externally realized cognitive functions, as well as the internal dynamics of agents. So, let's address the intricate nature of scripts as shared conceptual structures about event types. So in this context, weak scripts refer to the semantic connections between event types and concepts, which create clusters. These clusters offer cognitive framing related to the contextual goals, and these are essentially manifolds of unordered semantic web that are less formal are less easily implementable than direct strong scripts. They're associated with the process of conceptual mapping, which can be a statistical probability matrix over certain subconcepts. So this aligns with the prototype theory, where some subconcepts are more prevalent in a concept and others less so. The statistical mapping can vary across groups and can create communication breakdown. But within a niche, there is a shared probabilistic matrix for a given concept, thereby facilitating coordination. As such, weak scripts define the probability of certain categories being connected to certain observations, which increases or decreases the prior probability that certain kinds of states will be involved in a given event type. We can also accommodate the strong scripts, which are characterized by behavioral and measurable components. So for example, in the context of flirting, the goal of having sex or a relationship involves numerous conceptual connections such as attraction, connection, and mutuality. These categories can also be broken down into more concrete associations such as appearance and personality, which are related to physical attributes or behavioral traits. And adopting a script enables an agent to minimize free energy. It's achieved by avoiding the use of limited resources in randomly sampling elements of the environment to figure out which social goal to conform to, and by limiting the occurrence of errors when trying to achieve that social goal. So scripts essentially play the role of empirical priors that simplify belief updating by constraining the degrees of freedom used in modeling exchanges with the niche. The conceptual mappings used in scripts are probabilistic, similar to those in the generative model of active inference. So many mappings are shared through narrative construction and practice in a niche, but the agent also has a role in the interpretation of those clusters. Variations in the weak scripts of individuals can occur even when they exist in the same niche. So we can see how a niche plays a crucial role in both the weak and strong scripts. The niche has its own generative model of the social script, physically and discursively offering patterned observations to the agent. This enables the agent to make sense of its environment and pick up on social cues from the niche. They don't just learn scripts and rigidly adhere to them. Agents have to integrate these scripts into their behavior and continually adapt them in response to environmental changes. The scripts are hybrid structures that guide behavior through sequences of cultural affordance loops, which serve as bridges between the mind and the environment. So this is the fluid nature of scripts. They're adaptable, they're responsive to environmental changes. Through the conceptual mappings at play in scripts, the niche offers contextual cues and feedback to individuals, reliably furnishing those statistical contingencies over time. This offloads cognition to the niche and contributes to a more efficient minimization of free energy. In this process, weak scripts harness beliefs about how the expected salient social categories figure in specific situations, and beliefs about how they generate sensory data, which drives coordinated behavior and social cultural dynamics. Again, if we think of an example in a bar, we consider the gender roles we observe, where the niche provides cues and feedback to facilitate or reinforce certain patterns of behavior. If you think about flirting, again, it's a very patterned but gendered interaction where it's not perfectly symmetrical. So while gender is not entirely reducible to scripts, it does have its own subset of scripts. Individuality and commonalities at multiple temporal and spatial scales reflect the structure in the fields of affordance space, which gives us an intricate and nuanced understanding of gender dynamics. In general, they can be understood as traditional gendered segregation of affordances based in culturally determined sense of complementarity. We see how masculinity and femininity are associated with different social valences. In general, if you adhere to a feminist understanding of society, in patriarchy, the male pole is given a higher valence than the female pole. Moreover, cultural creativity plays a significant role in the introduction of gender scripts, which is going to help us understand gender dynamics. So the environments provide affordances and affordance landscapes where individuals assigned different genders can mostly enact the set of actions culturally restricted to one gender. And this approach also provides insights into how genders are defined in relation to one another. We can explain how scripts serve as cultural framing and how language bridges the gap between cognitive structures and social practices, which enriches our understanding of gender or society. But we can find numerous examples of fluid gender scripts in society. So for instance, there's more and more individuals identifying outside the traditional gender binary, which allows us to understand how gender is fluid. We can take cultures with non-binary gender identifications. Those have been influenced and sometimes erased by Western imperialism, but we still have records of them existing. We are also witnessing recent shifts in gender identification, where understanding is moving away from binary categorization, which provides more evidence for gender fluidity. This is especially given to us by affordance fields, which are more polysemic over time due to experience, directly contributing to cultural scripts. So we can think of the fact that women more and more are allowed to, wear men's clothes. It's been going on for something around 100 years. And men now are more allowed to wear what was generally qualified as women's clothes. We can see it in media representations. So, as cultural norms shift and embodiment possibilities increase, we see gender norms becoming less rigid. It results in an increase in the variety of scripts agents can negotiate, coupled with a decrease in the strength of normative constraints. Narratives here play a key role in this process, which allows them to reinforce and shift affordances offered to men and women. It also plays with intersections of class, ethnicity, which further shape the fields of affordances and shows us how the landscape of gender scripts is both complex and dynamic. Throughout time, the roles of men and women have undergone significant changes, which really serves to highlight how the gendered scripts are fundamentally fluid. They were not made so, they were so at the beginning. So if you think of the sphere of gender fluidity, individuals are constructing new scripts for themselves and society, challenging traditional gendered binaries through the negotiation of a different landscape of affordances, which modifies societal scripts. It's a give and take. So if we consider the skill intentionality framework, scripts can alter due to the polysemic nature of the fields of affordances and cultural shifts. The adaptability here is central to how active inference explains behavioral dynamics and the emergence of shared generative models, leading to the convergence of behaviors within cultural human ensembles. Cultural and social factors significantly influence the perception and enactment of these scripts. They don't exist in isolation. They interact and influence with one another, and they highlight the concept of intersectionality. Variations in culture are accounted for by differences in state transition narratives, leading to differentially parameterized generative models and thus differently enacted policies. So as an agent becomes more attuned to certain affordances based on their needs, individuals can attune to certain gender identities and expressions based on their personal experiences, perceptions, and even societal contexts. They navigate different gender identities and expressions as they interact with various elements of the environment, such as physical surroundings, societal norms, cultural expectation, and interpersonal relationships. You will not express your gender the same way with two different people. It will slightly shift based on your perception of the intersection of the different models they bring to bear. So as society evolves and recognition for non-binary and gender non-conforming identities increases, new scripts around gender and corresponding affordances may emerge. These new affordances for self-expression and identity formation allow individuals to engage in a more fluid and dynamic exploration of gender identity. So we can take real-life examples, such as trans or gender non-conforming individuals pondering which restroom they should use, to illustrate how individuals shape their affordance field and impact societal scripts around gender. But it also highlights how this can lead to frictions. Fluidity in gender scripts has extensive implications, including the renegotiation of gender expression when other scripts come into play. This leads us to the agency over scripts, which is a sort of fluidity and shapes our understanding of gender. It emphasizes the role of deontic value in policy selection within cultural group dynamics. So as more individuals, particularly the younger population, adopt new gender identities, society has to grapple with interpreting these new scripts. And this shift creates opportunity for inclusivity and a broader understanding of gender identity, but it also creates the potential for social conflicts due to the friction between the different moral models. Here, it's important to highlight that technology plays a vital role in shaping scripts. It enables people with similar conceptual clusters to find each other, leading to the development of dense script clusters. And these interactions reshape societal scripts around gender and illustrate how this can be dynamically shaped through agency. So, as we conclude, it's important to acknowledge that there's limitations to our current understanding of the formal model of scripts and its application to gender fluidity. We provided important insights, I think, but it can't account for the entirety of the complex phenomena of gender dynamics. The diversity and complexity of individual experiences, cultural contexts, and social nuances can make it challenging to encapsulate everything and all aspects of gender fluidity within the confines of one model. But effectively, this would be a question of having the right parameters. In terms of future research, we could examine in greater depth the implications of fluidity in gender scripts, have a more thorough exploration of how individuals renegotiate their gender expression when other scripts, such as those associated with class and ethnicity, come into play. And we could provide further insights into the dynamic of gender fluidity in those contexts. We could look at the intersection of technology and gender scripts. With the latest advancements, communities with similar conceptual clusters can find each other, and this leads to the development of script clusters with an internal valence, which provides a unique context for the study of gender scripts, but also in general for the study of cultural scripts arising from a larger group. We could also apply to different disciplines. So in the field of social computing, for instance, we could enable the prediction of social dynamics in the identification of individual pathologies. We can understand how scripts function. We can anticipate social interactions and behavioral patterns. We can contribute to fields like criminology, epidemiology, sexology. For instance, in criminology, understanding scripts can help us predict potential criminal behaviors, forecast the spread of certain health behaviors. In epidemiology, and in sexology, we could also understand how gender scripts shed lights on dynamics of sexual relationships or even relational patterns. So, let's recap. We explored the formal model of scripts. We examined the concepts of culturally gendered sensory motor affordance loops. We got an understanding of gender as an enactive process, and we understood the role of scripts in both social and gender dynamics. We delved into gender fluidity and influenced by societal expectation, cultural norms, and individual agency. And we discussed scripts as hybrid structures, guiding behaviors and how the polysemy of scripts and resources leads to fluidity in gender scripts. We think the implications of our research are significant. They can help us make sense of social behavior, gender fluidity, and the emergence of new identities. We examined how the environment constrains social possibilities by making certain category clusters salient and promoting sequences. It can help us address high rates of mental health issues, for instance, among the transgender population, and the potential violence against non-binary individuals, which leads to minority stress, which further underlines the real-world implications of this research. And so we really hope to contribute to a broader understanding of scripts and their role in various social structures and cultural evolutions. When we finally delve into our understanding of scripts and active inference framework, we really discover the intricacies of group dynamics. It becomes clear that these dynamics afford different things to different statuses of their members, regardless of their conformity to group norms. And so this dynamic interplay is crucial for understanding the fluidity of cultural scripts and how they shape our society, but also how power dynamics emerge. And so it's crucial to really map them properly as we integrate these kinds of theories into technology, which may reinforce the power dynamics currently at play. So thank you.
Thanks, Mao, for the great presentation. Could everybody unmute their microphones to give her a round of applause?
Woo-hoo!
Do you have any questions? Questions, comments? Please speak up. So I had a quick question. So when you were first like defining scripts, I thought it could also be thought as amortized behavior or amortized kind of expectations about what should be done or amortized policy. Could you maybe speak to that and the relationship with the model you presented?
I mean, that's precisely what we're suggesting, right? It's basically cashing out the expectations to the environment and back to the individual. So it's exactly what you just discussed. Yeah. I don't know what I'm completely agreeing with you, so I don't know what more you want me to discuss. Like, yeah. I think you perfectly like reformulated what we're presenting.
Okay. Yeah, I guess because you didn't mention the term amortized, I was wondering whether it was exactly this or whether there was like a subtle difference that I didn't grasp. But okay, that's
precisely what it is.
Encouraging. Okay, thank you. Alex?
Yeah, hi, thanks. Wow, that was great. So I guess I'm wondering about the argument that these that certain scripts or parameters of them or categories were always fluid. I guess I just wonder, I would think in general, culture and other things have this sort of feedback loop, right? And so I can see one hypothesis, and I may have missed your argument, so if so, it's that simple. But one possibility is that these certain categories were always in principle fluid, and we're just discovering that due to, I guess, certain constraints being relaxed. But it could be that different circumstances created different needs for a different level of precision in certain categories. So
yeah,
can we disambiguate those? Yeah.
No, precisely. I mean, it's the idea behind certain types of societies having more rigid gender norms and others having more relaxed, right? So as, for instance, women developed more rights and more capacity to be independent, there was less of a need to conform to certain gender norms, because if you were ostracized, say, by non-conforming, there were less consequences. Like, there were still some consequences. There was a rough fight, right? But you could survive, you could earn money. Therefore, you didn't need to have to conform. In societies where, for instance, women still have less rights, non-conformity can have drastic impacts on your survival. And this is the idea behind, like, the friction we mentioned for transness and non-binary identification. It's not as easy as I have this affordance now. It's also, there's going to be a social cost. There are areas where this social cost is lessened and therefore I can live there. And that's the whole, diaspora, I guess, like when everybody came into the cities, right? It became easier to find people kind of like you when you come to a big city. That's one of the reasons why we have like gay villages in a lot of big cities, because this is a way to find each other. And if we find each other, we now have a social environment where we can be this way. It's way more acceptable. And because it becomes more acceptable, everybody else kind of gets the ripples of being exposed to these gendered scripts or to these, social scripts, and in general it has these effects that it kind of makes it more acceptable in these large urban areas and less acceptable in areas where there's less of a cluster that can give momentum to that social script.
For sure.
Could you elaborate on whether gender fluidity, whether there are some cultures where gender is historically fluid, or whether it's purely like something more recent?
There's been a lot of anthropological research into other kinds of identities, like the binary. It's not like the binary is only Western. There's a lot of philosophical traditions where the binary is made very clear. But so there's societies where there wasn't a binary. There was always multiple types of identifications where your gender had, for instance, relations to the kinds of spirits you could access. And sometimes you had access to several at once, and you weren't one or the other. You were kind of a little bit of both. There's societies where you can switch. You can switch depending on what's required. It's just that as Christianity and in general more religions that tended to take over a certain culture have tended to push this down a little bit, like especially colonialism has tried to really erase certain types of behaviors by implementing Christianity with very strict gendered roles. And so we find that there are remnants of these cultures, but a lot of them have been erased. However, like for instance, in India, there are, I think it's hijra is the term. You can, and it used to be a very accepted identity, and even spiritual identity. And because of the influence of Christianity brought, I'm so sorry, Karl, brought by the British, it's become a more stigmatized identity. And so there's a shifting landscape right now where they're trying to come back, but it's also none of these identities are just existing in silos, right? They also exist within a sexual paradigm. And so a lot of hijras are now mostly associated with prostitution. And so that also fits within an entire paradigm around whether we should engage in sexuality and whether there's a whole purity aspect to, having more open sex or less open sex, which should be within the confines of a very specific type of relationship. And so we can see how rigidity around certain norms also kind of pulls rigidity around other norms as well. And so when you relax one, you tend to relax the rest as well, right? Because the wobbliness necessitates wobbliness in other places. And so you can see these constructs very much at play, say, in the United States right now, where the evangelist population has a very strong hold over certain norms, and that entails a hold over other norms as well. And they've made this very clear. If we allow certain behaviors, we allow all kinds of behaviors, and everything falls apart. Society no longer works. And you can understand why they take that position, right? Because the current system works for them. And so if we wobble the current system, they are no longer assured that the new system will work for them as well. So they're trying to rigidify certain social norms again, whereas an entire swath of the population is trying to make it a little looser to bring forward a potential system that is more beneficial for them. So all these things are intimately connected. Oh, did I answer your question?
Yeah, that was super interesting. I guess there's also like a political aspect to that. Maybe some people become more extreme one direction, it would have some political consequences.
Yeah, I mean the Handmaid's Tale, right? That's exactly it. Like everything has political consequences, whether you agree with them or not. The types of narratives we weave, the kinds of concepts, the strength of the weak scripts, in the sense like the let's not say the strength, let's say the breadth of the weak scripts has an impact on the kinds of strong scripts you have as well. So yeah, everything is connected. Yeah, I don't know how not to say this in a trivial way, but yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. Alex?
Yeah, just to follow up on that. So really interesting points here. And so, okay, I think there's an opportunity here. So like the kind of maybe accurate, but the least charitable way of looking at the conservative factions wanting to hold on to things is that the resulting state will be worse for them. And there's that might be true. But also, I think there's an opportunity to understand this divide here, in that at least some people on that side can't imagine that there is another stable attractor. So they think that it's this or it's just anarchy and death. So I think that's really, if we could understand each other's motives across political divides by acknowledging that, and then we could work out. The problem is it's hard to convince someone if it's like, I have a model that shows that there are multi-stability and stuff. It's like, well, there's a cultural divide about accepting such models too. So it's very tricky, but.
No, absolutely. Yeah. Completely. I exactly. I think through these kinds of models, we can understand where the friction arises. It's literally free energy. It's like my model cannot compute what's going on here. Like I'm trying to fight having to change, having to expend all the energy to change my model. I want to confirm my beliefs. I don't want to have to, again, like, so you can understand how some signals that cause error would be more or less emotionally valenced, right? Like you can understand how these things become like deeply potentially violent. Now, that's not to say we need to excuse the violence, and it's not to say that every position is equivalent, but you do understand how, say, a lot of the approaches to normalizing something is really literally about giving people evidence. Like one of the best organization in Montreal is called the Grille. And what it does, it's super simple. It'll send people from the LGBT community into schools to just like chat, just like be in a room and be like, hey, ask me questions, talk to me. And we find that the result is such a normalization and a much, much lower rate of homophobic behaviors and language, because it's really just about like taking the time to like update your model such that, you know, you can actually not face so much error all the time. And they've reproduced this kind of approaches for racism, for a lot of things, even with people who aren't children, right? Just when you're faced with someone, really, like not in a group, not within like these complex dynamics, just with someone, it relaxes these things because they're still a human. They're in front of you. They experience things. And so it becomes much more normal. And that's also, I think it also allows us to have a little bit of compassion. When you understand this dynamic, you understand that there's room for people to learn and change. You're not supposed to be perfect from the start. You're supposed to grow. Everyone's model comes from a place and can go to a different place. So it's meant to not treat people as like you are fundamentally evil or you are fundamentally weird. We're growing together, and the way to grow has a clear pathway here. Like if we understand each other's model, I can understand how to like we can nudge each other in a direction where we no longer have all these friction in a formal way, say.
Maybe just real quick before Maxwell jumps in, you mentioned children. I suspect that children have among the least rigid models. So yeah, anyway, I guess it's just, the objective there is to not instill a rigid model unnecessarily or something.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Maxwell, do you want to jump in?
Yeah, so I thank you. That was a very cool presentation. As you know, I'm reading a lot about gender and transness and all this interesting stuff over the last bit. I wanted to know if you thought that the model that you presented today had anything instructive to tell us about social construction of gender categories. Increasingly, I'm having difficulty parsing the metaphysics of gender. I'm sure you'll agree that it's a highly non-trivial thing. And so I wanted to know if you had any thoughts about what this work tells us about social construction of gender, and maybe how gender is related to sex. Very unloaded, very light question.
No, I mean, so I'm not sure I would frame it that way exactly, but if I had to, I would say sex exists within a power matrix, right? Like, let's imagine for now that sex is a binary, because it's not even a given that it's a binary, right? There's many, many examples of intersex people. There's examples of people with different chromosomes that don't manifest in the sex. So like, let's issue for now the definition of what falls under sex, because it's, again, super complex. But let's assume that we have a social understanding of what sex is, and we generally associate it with a type of genitals, say, and that is not all, right? Like, a genital has an affordance. We consider that it has an affordance, and this affordance is within a power matrix, right? So like, I probably would have to carry a baby if I have a vagina. You probably do not. And so there's an imbalance here. And so because of this imbalance, you can imagine how it puts certain people in a weaker political position. And so given that, and I'm not going to explain the entirety of like the evolution of patriarchy, but like, let's imagine that from this point, there is a possibility for a type of role that's imbricated within an affordance and an embodiment to potentially take advantage of that imbalance. And so when you start doing this, you can see how it kind of snowballs into a set of rigidified expectations to maintain the advantage given to that imbalance. So women become the locus of control of patrimony, which is allowing you to accrue capital, right? So in a society where you wouldn't necessarily accrue capital, maybe these affordances would be very, very different, because there wouldn't be a need to take advantage of that potential imbalance, right? So it's not that it's fundamentally linked to sex. There are certain matrices of power and affordances and construction of what we value that then take advantage of certain embodiments and then push them into these snowballed gendered patterns. And the reason I'm saying this is that today, when we have come all this way and back, and we're back to like gendered affordances are a little bit more fluid, it's not as clear, we find that this imbalance doesn't have to be that way, right? Like, women don't have to give birth. Even if they do give birth, they don't have to take care of the child. Even if they do choose to give birth, they don't have to do it through their own bodies anymore. Like, there's many possibilities, and so we see that it's not intrinsically linked to sex. It's linked to our understanding of the matrix of power dynamics. Does that answer your question?
It really helps. So, I mean, follow-up question, again, kind of like very pedestrian. How would you define gender?
So I would define gender as socially constructed structures which push individuals into roles which can be, in this historical context, complementary, that are generally associated with the sex assigned at birth. But in a different setting, gender could be simply an expression of how you wish to be perceived by other members of society, such that they understand how to behave towards you within a given matrix that may or may not have anything to do with sexuality. I think that would be the next stage in our evolutionary pattern. Like, I think it's no longer going to be about this complementarity of related to reproduction, but let's say that we evolved into a society where gender became very, very fractured, and it still had to do with our relationship to intimacy and to caring for, say, offsprings, etc. Let's say it still had to do with this. Then I could imagine that there would be roles that are more like I'm going to help with this specific thing, and I'm going to help with this thing, and I'm going to provide this but not that, and I'm going to give my body but then it's over. Like, do you see what I mean? There could be an entire way to coordinate behavior such that we know what to expect, but it's not necessarily something that has to be rigid, in the sense that I could occupy different roles at different times if I clearly express it to other people. And then we could see how it wouldn't have to be a binary either. It could be a series of different kinds of ways to exist.
I really like that answer. I guess what I'm struggling between like three different families of definitions, and they all seem to kind of be in play in what you're describing. So I mean, I think we reject anyone who knows anything about biology and you know, the way that categories of persons are socially constructed will probably reject the claim, the kind of bioessentialist claim that a woman is an adult human female. I mean, you just push on the first one of those things, right? Adult, what does adult mean? Well, you know, I'm an adult at 21 in the US, I'm an adult at 18, and so it can't be a biological category. I think that kind of doesn't hold water when you investigate it. The other options on the table are something like self-identification theory. So a woman is someone who identifies as a woman. There's the social role theory that you were kind of alluding to, and those two, I think, I'm having trouble parsing them. I mean, just to illustrate the example, you could have like a gendered agent that has no self-appraisal, and that would still count as, say, a woman or a man or whatever, according to the social construct kind of view, but that wouldn't on a self-identification view.
Yeah.
And then finally, there's something like, and this, you also kind of alluded to this, it's a kind of prescriptive view. So I'm a woman because I would like society to treat me this or that way. And I was wondering if you could help me kind of untangle those views with respect to the work that you've presented. This is, I mean, genuine interest. Like I'm actually really trying to think through this.
Yeah, so it's complicated to disconnect our categories, our behavioral patterns, and our intentions from the historical context, right? So there is a very real sense in which the current discourse around gender has a purpose. It's not just a factual thing. It's like we're trying to get from point A to point B, and that requires diminishing, just as we said, right? Like constraining the possible degrees of freedom because we want to get there and it's important. And so that's why we usually talk about like mental health and the rates of suicide and the rates of murder. It's meant to be like, hey, this isn't just some whatever. It's like there's a real existential crisis here that needs to be addressed. And the best way to address it, the most compassionate way to address it, is to have this discourse. That's one thing. Another thing is we're often not talking exactly about the same thing. Like people, they talk about identification because they're like, well, you may say that, but I can't predict you that way. And so that's where the friction arises, right? And then the other person is like, well, actually, you're choosing not to predict me that way. Because if you start predicting me that way, then all of those structures that are in place that you want to maintain in place no longer hold. And so I think in the case of whether it's just an identity or whether it's being put on you by society, it's not one or the other. Your identification doesn't always line up with what society says is the prototype of that identification. And that's the entire idea behind a hegemony, right? Like there's a hegemonic masculinity sort of prototype, and then everything underneath is considered less than. And because there's a social valence associated with it, everything less than has less power in society. And this is true whether gender is fluid or whether it's not fluid. This is just a fact. So people who generally try to reframe gender as identity first are also trying to challenge the fact that there is a power valence associated with these categories, and therefore potential degree of oppression that tends to correlate with patriarchy and white supremacy and fascist ideologies. Like it's not just that everybody who doesn't believe in trans is fascist, but there is a degree to which these structures, held as they are, tend to maintain a certain kind of order that is currently historically white, male, and able, etc. So as far as whether we should expect other people to understand our expressions of our own gender, regardless of what their expectations are, I don't think that's fair. However, I do think that we should work towards, because there's so much evidence for this polysemy and for the fact that there shouldn't be one direction from which everything is defined, or at least that there shouldn't be one that's considered better through a kind of valence. We should understand how perhaps this conceptual cluster isn't really helpful anymore. Like it doesn't really allow us to predict anything anymore. So perhaps we should, do away with it. That I guess that's kind of the proposal I'm going towards. Perhaps for some people, using that concept is useful because it says to a type of group, this is what I mean when I say this word, and thus please treat me this way. But for a lot of groups, maybe this concept doesn't really add any depth, counterfactual depth, and therefore, we could not really think of it that way anymore. And my identification really wouldn't matter in any case, because you can't predict whether I want to have a baby or not just because I'm a woman, So does that answer your question? I feel like I answered, there was a lot in your question. I feel like I touched on the topics you wanted.
That's very helpful. Thank you very much.
Alex, do you want to follow up?
Yeah, it was kind of a follow-up. What did I want to say? Basically, yeah, I just wanted to draw. So I think this gets a little bit complicated. Of course, it's complicated. But specifically, I just think there's a. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of replying to a character that Mao created in responding. So that's kind of silly. I'm having a dialogue with someone that you said there's this argument. So I'm talking to that position. But just the response that you're choosing not to predict me in a certain way. I think there's a gap between you're predicting me in a way that there's so many layers to this. You're predicting me in a way that will be beneficial to you, right? Or that you feel or think on some deep level is important that I predict you that way. And then versus you're just choosing that, because I think there's this whole question of voluntarism about belief and behavior. And it might be that you're deep, it might be that the change you're asking me to make in my generative model is so extreme that it would actually be perhaps beneficial in the long run, perhaps the right change to make, but it would actually hurt, right? Because you're changing your generative model so deeply. And an example of this is just the whole, I think there's a lot of bad, what's the phrase? Just badness, ill feeling, and all sorts of things around just the terms man and woman. And I think it's partly because some people are committed to a generative model where there's a simple relationship between sex and gender. And so I'm just saying it's maybe a complicated proposition to say if you're asking someone to change that, you're really asking them to shift a deep axis of alignment. And that's, again, it's something we have to negotiate clearly. But it's a negotiation. It's not, it's not like a simple one person is just being impolite, not respectful, I think. Yep.
So again, this is a continuum, of course. So I'm not saying everybody who can't is choosing not to, but consider these two scenarios. Not everybody, but most of us who were born within 1990 and before were not that exposed to gender fluidity. If you lived in a Western society, you were very exposed to traditional gender roles, reinforced by media, reinforced by institutions. It was very clear, expected, defined. But some of us, through interaction with people who expressed this need, their suffering, we're like, all right, well, I don't see you that way yet, but I will make the conscious effort through these semantic little tricks and through doing the work of reframing my model. I will do my best to, if I don't see you that way, at least act as if until I see you that way. And so now it's much more normal. I'm pretty sure if you look at Blair White, you see a woman, like there's no cognitive work that you have to do in order to align your perception with what she would like to be perceived as. It's not hard for you to say she. It just comes, right? It's like this pre-conscious affordance loop. Now there's some people for whom doing that work isn't clear. They're like, why would I mean, I don't need to. No one around me requires this seems silly. And then there's some people who know they could do the work, who know why they should do the work, and are actively choosing to do the opposite. And I'm not saying that it's everybody, but like there's very clear people like MTG, for instance, or Lawrence Boebert, to give just a few examples, who are actively misgendering the person to make a point and to also potentially hurt that person's feelings. So that's why I'm talking about the continuum. I don't think that's everybody, but I do think that some very loud, very influential members of society are working to like return back. They can see the wobbling, the Matt Walshes of the world. They're actively saying, no, this is all wrong. I can see what you're doing. I don't want it. And I want to go back the other direction. And I don't think it's because their model couldn't. I think if they're capable of perceiving this meta process, they probably could. They're just choosing not to for a very specific purpose, which is, explicit, right? It's explicit. They want to maintain a certain social order. They make it very, very clear, and they act on it. So, I'm not saying they're evil. I'm saying I understand where they're coming from. I understand what this is in reaction to, and we can map the degree to which their model is acting on the rest of society as well.
Yeah, I'm gonna let Maxwell jump in, I think. Yeah, thanks.
Oh, that was a previously.
Oh, old hand. Okay.
Yeah.
Old hand.
Apologies.
Do we have other questions or points or follow-ups? Thanks for the great discussion, by the way. Okay, well, in that case, I'll hand it over to Karl.
It's my turn now, is it?
It is.
Yeah. You haven't left very much for me to say, though, have you? That's other than, well, let me just start. That was again an excellent discussion, but also I thought a very fluent presentation. You were almost word perfect. As if you're defending your thesis again, or if you're going to do it as you will do it in the future. Very impressive, beautiful graphics. And I reiterate, I don't think there's very much left for me to say. I just practically, I just wanted to ask a couple of very simple questions, starting with the simplest. What's polysemy? Polysemy.
Right. Oh yeah, it's the fact that words can have multiple meanings.
Ah, so that's like a degenerate mapping for semantics, then.
Yeah, exactly.
That's right.
Ah,
Yeah,
I never knew that.
seme is the same root as semantics. So it's polyseme.
Ah, very
It might
good.
be semni. I don't know how to pronounce that word since it's semantics, but it's the
Yes.
same root.
Yes, I see. Yeah. So in genomics, that is degeneracy. It's the same gene can actually have many different functions. Pleiotropism is the converse. Anyway, good. Thank you. That clears that up. And just to make sure that I've understood the basic thesis from the mechanics point of view, this notion of scripts being, or the clusters providing empirical priors, that that seems to be, just check I got this right, that seems to be structurally a really important notion, that you are implicitly dealing with generative models that have this very deep structure, such that stuff that determines your behavior is explicitly conditioned upon some clusters that you would have to either recognize in and of yourself, or in other people, or in the dyadic or social context, that then picks out certain belief structures that will now determine your behavior in that context, provided you can. I see, excellent. And I noticed you use the word clusters, and that's nice because Alex is here. He likes clusters in embedding spaces. if you were going to model this explicitly, and to a certain extent I think you probably have, or at least your colleagues have, these will become just basic mutually exclusive states. I am this or I am that, and it's the question of how fine that fine-grained that space is. Excellent. So if I had to press you, and I'm now thinking very practically here, and perhaps I should just preempt this, because practically, to have these kinds of models at hand puts in a position to actually simulate these things and do scenario modeling and ask questions of the sort, does the increased communication afforded by social media have a causative effect in the emergence of different kinds of categories? So to answer that kind of question using numerical experiments in silico, you'd have to actually create an artificial social life and get to grips with the implicit ensemble dynamics and communication. But in so doing, one would have to be very specific about where you are going to write in the manifestation of scripts. And I mean, by which I mean, if I had to press you on what is going to be conditioned. Say I've recognized that in this context, I now need to be a woman, and in this context, that means that I am now going to pick out or emphasize certain aspects of my belief structures about what I am going to do. And you haven't got many choices. You've just basically got a mapping to the paths or policies I might pursue. So, in NDP language, the E, which could be separated from the D matrix in the sense that I'm just recognizing I am in this situation. So what I'm saying is that there is a subtle distinction between recognizing the paths in this, say, social interaction available to me, that I would call my, which I think Lance referred to as a sort of amortized habitual responses, irrespective of your affordances associated with the epistemics or the final preferences, just the habits themselves. That is distinct from, say, so I'm making this on the fly, but I find myself being inferring that I should be a stereotypical woman in this particular social, and that immediately shrinks the repertoire of policies and paths and habits that I might engage with, as opposed to I recognize that I am in a gay bar. So the initial conditions are now what basically shapes the subsequent trajectories, even if those trajectories are exactly the same, but starting from different points. So that would be one choice. Is it a D or an E, or is it both? But I think the more burning question is, you actually mentioned it explicitly, there's a balance between the habitual policies that are afforded to me by recognizing certain contextual cues. So I think that's what you meant by cultural affordances or deontic cues, that these are special kinds of observations that immediately enable me to infer I am operating in this context. And in this context, I have available to me these habits, and it means that I am starting in this particular situation, which is, I think, technically or mechanically very different from recognizing in this context means I prefer these outcomes, because that's the other way to change the policies, to change the behavior in the second kind, the enactive reading of. I think perhaps it was a strong reading of scripts. This sort of so it certainly made a lot of sense to me that was well, the way that you framed it in terms of, in this context, I have these preferred outcomes because these are characteristic outcomes of this kind of me, and I could literally condition the C matrix, for example, on this context, and that means that I will be compelled, irrespective of my habits, to pursue these policies because these are the kind of outcomes that are characteristic of me. They constrain me, this kind of me that I've inferred that I should be. So what would you want? So there's three, and there aren't that many. We're talking because you said explicitly these empirical hierarchies. So immediately we know they just provide constraints on something below. There are only three ways in which you can, or there are only three objects that you can get direct access to below, and that's basically your E and your D and your C. Now, do you want all of them, or did you have in mind specific different kinds of the enactive realization of scripts?
I think it would be all of them, because it depends on whether there's more rigidity around the C, right? Like in some contexts, because of the reduction of the affordances, there's really only one positive outcome, and therefore what has to change is the way through which you can achieve that outcome if necessary. And then there's situations where the outcome space is super large, and then now I have to decide like the kind of me that reaches X given outcome through the priors and the habits. So I think we have to. That's why I was at this conference with Samuel Vessière and Michael Lifshitz. We were trying to talk about the topology of contexts, and I think that it links to this idea of what exactly is the piece, the parameter that is more or less rigid at a given time, and why. And I think it has to do with this notion of scales. Like if there are certain scales at which I can see farther in time, and there's a degree to which at that scale I can change the C and pick the C, it might mean that at this scale there isn't. Like this is a gate I need to pass in order to get to that higher level outcome. But I can change the D and E in order to get to this C, which gets me to this choice of C's over there. So it gets back to this like scale of in nested scripts. But the thing is, I'm not sure right now how to cash out where the rigidity or flexibility or happens. I feel like that's the emergent part of where things become choosable is not clear in my head. This is still a blurry part.
Right. Well, I mean, that's good, because that means that there is a program of work over the years to come to actually, if you're not sure, there's a hypothesis, and if there's a hypothesis space, there is some useful resolution and science to be done here. So possibly of a social science or cultural science, or ecological science, I'm not sure, possibly even evolutionary science. So that's great. So if you're not sure, I think putting the sort of the hierarchical nesting aside, I think that's a little bit. I'm just thinking if I had to start simulating this, that would be year 3. But you did bring to the table a really interesting one, which was the balance between a picking out or contextualizing particular preferences versus picking out or emphasizing certain habits depends upon how certain I am about the consequences of my action. I think just knowing that provides a really interesting, well, it provides an answer, first of all, to my question. You need to have both the E and the C, because in some situations you will have as you roll out in order to assess whether your characteristic outcomes are going to be realized, if you're very uncertain about the situation, that uncertainty will explode, and the expected free energy, the score that differentiates one way forward from another way forward just flatlines. There's nothing there, so you have to fall back on your habits. So there's a self-tuning of the balance between your habitual response and your response that is governed by a different kind of affordance. Because when I use affordance, I deliberately use it in a sort of non-Gibsonian way. So it's the affordance that underwrites a particular policy. So it's not about the affordance of something out there, an observation. It's not the cultural affordance that allows you to recognize I should be behaving in this kind of way, in this characteristic way. I use affordance deliberately as just a way of decomposing the imperatives for behavior and for plans and the like. But of course, the pragmatic or the utilitarian affordance does depend upon having confident beliefs that this is actually what's going to happen if I do this. So if I've never been in this bar before and I don't know what's going to happen if I do this, then I'm going to fall back on my habits. It would be wonderful to demonstrate that in a social context, just because I think it's quite a fundamental it's something that's quite fundamental that is brought to the table by having this deep model where you're contextualizing ways of navigating any given situation upon categorically different clusters or ways of being. The other trick in subsequent discussions with Michael and Samuel and the like is just talk about C as characteristics. So you've got loads of choice. If you're talking to machine learning people, you can say, oh, C is just a cost function. It's like your negative reward. If you're talking to economists, you can say, oh no, C is just a cost function. It's just like your negative utility. If you're talking to physicists, oh, C is just a constraint, as in the constraint maximum entropy principle. If you're talking to Maxwell when he's in a gendered fine-graining mood, then C becomes just a characteristic. It's literally the probabilistic description of the characteristic states that constitute my pullback attractor, to which I am always working towards. So you forget about rewards and utilities and costs, and just think about what is characteristic of me in this context, with this self-identification, or to be more sophisticated, what is expected of me, and what do I infer is expected of me characteristically, and it is the C matrix that determines that. And what you've just said is that, well, that's fine, recognizing that these are the characteristic outcomes I should aspire to in this context, but if I'm not certain about the consequences of my behavior, I can't really use those. I'm going to have to fall back on my habits, which of course are going to be learned and informed by repeated epistemic and utilitarian. So you can learn epistemic habits, but you can also learn pragmatic habits, and that's just the automatization that you find in ethology or behavioral psychology, but also interestingly the amortization that. Yeah, that would be the machine learning's way of phrasing that. So I think it's a really interesting access that you could, in principle, simulate quite simply just with one MDP that was deep, that had the capacity to recognize those deontic cues, that had a sufficiently non-dyslexothymic carving of in this instance, gender ways of expressing gender or using gender constraints in a particular situation. So that's one thing for one PhD student. But of course, the bigger question now is in your last conversation with Alex, you were talking about, well, it's good for me or it's good for you. Of course, the free energy perspective is there isn't that doesn't exist. It's good for us or it's bad for us. So that means that your questions now reduce to when it's good for us. And what do you mean by good for us? Well, I just mean that we're all mutually predictable, and we're all occupying our characteristic states, where those characteristic states are co-constructed through exchange and communication in the usual way. So that speaks to another set of simulations, again, which you've been involved with, but I mean, one can imagine reproducing those in the context of gender characteristics and inferring what characteristics, and then ask questions about what would happen if the opportunity to find people like me was increased or decreased. Social mobility. That was I thought I never thought about it, but just your notion of being able to move into a city means you actually can find the gay village or the train modelling club for chaps, and which you wouldn't have if you're living out in the village. But of course, social media is just a massive game changer in this context, and it just struck me looking at really interesting questions that I would pick up a paper and read at the weekend. Would be of the sort: has social media really perturbed group formation and our ability to clearly recognize stereotypes in a constructive way? And how does that relate to speciation and evolutionary thinking? And is there a natural pressure for increasing speciation and increasing in-group formation that just emerges from the fact that we're all trying to learn about each other? And how does this, if you like, increasingly fine-grained, you'd express it as fluid, from my point of view, in terms of sort of building a generative model, being fluid could either mean the transitions between one state and another state are now more probable, but it could also mean I've now got a greater repertoire of being a man or being a woman, everything in between. So it's having a more fine-grained, a more expressive generative model. And I'm just, I would be interested to know whether that increased fluidity is an emergent property. Could it be any other way? Could you actually get the reverse? Could you actually get a coarsening of gender? And I ask that because, and I'll hand back to you now, because I do see a certain coarsening of various characteristic ways of being in politics and well, yeah, I think largely in politics. You've now got polarization wherever you look. But there does seem to be, since the advent of social media and globalization and fake news and all that good stuff, there does seem to be a manifestation where everything is blue or red. And it's not quite as it was 20 years ago before social media, where you could be blue, red, green, and a bit of yellow. It does seem that there's been the opposite trend. While you become more fluid in terms of personal gender identity, you become much less fluid in terms of popularism and in terms of sort of political ideologies. Well, first of all, do you have any comments upon that from a social evolutionary point of view, or a cultural evolutionary point of view, or cultural niche construction? And two, how would you actually sort of test the hypotheses using numerical studies?
So to the first point, of course, these are hypotheses. Like, they're not, I don't have like studies saying one or the other, and I don't think we could, because technology is moving too fast. But eventually maybe we could look at such studies. It would be interesting indeed. I think it has to do with a mechanism that Maxwell and I have been discussing for a while, which is power dynamics, and how these power dynamics become attractors and therefore either reinforce or loosen, make Markov blankets more or less porous, because they act as like this very, very strong attractor or a release. And so in the case of gender per se.
Well, could I just interject for 1 second now, just to give a slightly more complete picture? So, Karl, the analogy that we're pursuing now is that power, in the sense of social power, is analogous to gravitational mass. So if you're thinking of like the space of all policies, and thinking of the policies pursued by specific agents, a powerful agent is an agent whose mechanics are associated with high mass, basically, or high precision, with the effect basically that you pull other agents, much like a gravitational field, towards the region and policy space where you basically are right now. Sorry for the interjection, Mal.
No, I mean, exactly. So then we can see how, if the group, like it's all about, it does waves, right? It's over time, things accrue mass, and then because things accrue mass, they also accrue like pockets, and these pockets become more massive, and these pockets mean that there's more and more shifts and differentiation, and eventually it breaks down, but it brings back up again. So this special, like that's the whole globalization idea, right? Like at first we were villages, and then we were like counties, and then we were countries, and now we are the world, and everything that happens anywhere in the world affects everybody. But we still have scales at which there are boundaries that are more or less meaningful than others. So within the blue and within the red, there are more and more subclusters. And for a long time in France, for instance, one of the reasons that the left couldn't do anything is because they were completely fractured. There were too many. They were still under like the left, but they all had these different like policies. They were going in a bit of a different direction, and therefore there was no certainty which they should do, but they all felt very certain about their own like pathway, and they couldn't reconcile with the others or pick one that had more importance than the others, and so they couldn't like create momentum enough. Whereas on the right, the outcomes they wanted were very, very simple. They just wanted to stay where they were. It's the power of status quo. Status quo is very certain. Change is very uncertain. So we often see fragmentation on the left and clusters on the right. And so the only way for the left to do anything is to kind of get towards the center and be like, fine, we'll pick that one, but we don't want to. Whereas on the right, it's like, yes, we'll pick that one. That's the one we want. And I feel like this maps very nicely to this question of certainty of outcomes that we were discussing. So to get back to gender, I think we are going to see, depending on the consequences, the free energy involved in having a like more or less fluidity, either more coarse graining or more fine graining. And I think in urban areas, we're going to see more and more fine graining until certain clusters lose momentum. So like, I'm pretty sure right now, there's some people who identify as clouds, and that's lovely. Good for you. Do what you want. I support you fully, but it's not very predictable. And so it's possible that not a lot of people are going to pick up on that. However, in the terminology, say, by gender, I know what to expect. I know that some days you'll be more one, some days you'll be more the other, because I'm leveraging all these past evidence, and I can sort of reconceptualize and map and have expectations based on my existing model. So I think that's what's going to happen. The prediction I have is we're going to see an explosion. Some are going to be more or less useful because they're going to rely less on the past experiences, and also there's going to be potentially momentum developed through very influential people that are going to push a certain identity, so create an attractor. Even if it was less predictable at first, it may become more predictable because of social media, like you said. So that's what might happen. In terms of politics, it really has to do with the power dynamics at play, right? Like, no other party really can gather the momentum that these clusters have. And so if we want to achieve anything at the scale at which these things are enacted, so politics is usually at the scale of like the country. But if you look at the scale of a city, there are more parties, and you could have someone from the Green Party actually run your city, because at this level, it's very clearly like enacted, right? I understand what that means. So yeah, I think that answers the question, but it's so complicated that we would have to like properly map this out. But yeah.
Well, one way to, I mean, yeah, that was very compelling, and it would be lovely to see. I repeat, sort of numerical or perhaps even analytic, if you can actually sort of show that the precision of various beliefs corresponds, as you say, to their mass in a sort of Newtonian analogy. It could actually be an analytic, but it'd be lovely to see this simulated, sort of fast forwarding over the next 30 years in either politics or gender, in a gender space. One way I think that I would counsel you sell that is just to draw the dots between all the different ways, all the different sort of forces, literally, that would underlie the emergence of these different structures and their dynamics. So Maxwell already introduced the notion between the degree to which a particular party or a particular sort of characteristic way, or a particular attractor would attract other members of an ensemble, and the analogy between gravitational force that actually cuts both ways. So there is a simulation which you probably know about, done with Chris Frith, about communication hermeneutics, where we literally just changed the precision of two birds when they're singing slightly different songs, and showed that there was literally an attraction of the less precise baby bird to the mother or the father bird, who had more precise beliefs about their dynamics. So it was literally just one parameter, and it was just the precision of the dynamics, and everything else emerged from that. So you basically broke the symmetry. You had technically what's called a sort of a skew product system, or a master-slave kind of, or teacher-student kind of relationship. So from the dynamical systems theory point of view, precision and the merging of attractors, or the convergence of attractors, would be absolutely right. But it does go the other way around, actually. So if you just look at the physics of random dynamical systems, and you ask what is mass, it's actually the precision of your random fluctuations. So mass as an if you like, a metaphor. So if you don't reify mass as you would in physics, and just think, what is mass as a little hypothesis or sort of heuristic, it is actually exactly the same. It is the degree to which it's the precision of any random fluctuations. So you can sell that. The other nice thing about that, though, is that once you've said it's the precision, and you ask, well, what is the precision? It is just a rate constant. So it is it's just the degree to which things are changed. So if things are very, very precise, what you're normally saying in any sort of certainly in any belief updating scheme, but also more generally in physics, it just means that your rate of change is going to be more sensitive to states of affairs. So the proportion of the constant of proportionality just is the precision. So it's just at a very fundamental level the rate constant. And once you've got that in your head, then you've got this notion of also selection for selectability, where on an evolutionary time scale, those rate constants basically determine your fluidity, your propensity for fluidity, your selectability, your impressionability. So you were just describing, I thought very artfully, what you think is going to happen in terms of a decentralization or fractionation and speciation, and then some will survive, and then they will coalesce. And I love this sort of the right wing being the conservative, precise literally conserving its attractive set, while all these other things are trying to get a look in. I thought it was very nice. But the very fact there are lots of other things trying to get a look in suggests that there has been a fundamental change in the mutation rates or this in this ability to change. So I'm thinking here of another instance of this kind of thing from evolutionary thinking, which is selection for selectability. And of course, that selectability is itself subject to selective pressure under the free energy principle or under sort of natural selection read as Bayesian model selection, that these hyperparameters, which are themselves precisions and rate constants, are themselves optimized. And what you may be saying is that things like social media and globalization, certainly in a geopolitical context, have actually changed that hyperparameter in a really fundamental way, which means things are going to evolve much more quickly over the next decade or so than they have over the previous decade or so. And if that's true, then it would be nice if everybody could see that on paper in figure 3, because then you start to identify, well, what are the causes of this hyperparameter? And you start to get into the arguments for deglobalization, arguments for regulation of social media, and some really sort of important constraints on selectability and evolutionary rates, or the respective precisions of the hyperparameters that just are these rate constants or these precisions. So I repeat, if you can get that into either an analytic or a numeric framework, I think that would be very powerful. I'm not so sure about whether this would be powerful in gender studies, but it certainly would be powerful in politics and possibly economics, but possibly just politics and ethology generally. It's these dynamics you're talking about, I think, are very prescient at the moment. I'm tempted to mention climate change as well, but probably that's going a bit too far.
No, I agree. I think this work is important and isn't just contained to gender. It's about our capacity to represent the different kinds of possibilities we have available to us, and that's culture. And I think you're right. The rate of change has to do with the degree to which we're connected to other people, and that's why culture now evolves at such a rate that it's not even just technology, it goes beyond the material. The ways we interpret evidence now has changed and has become much more likely to speed up, just because we have so many momentum and pushes, and as you said, the precision isn't just coming from one attractor anymore. We have many channels at which these attractors are being pushed to us, especially given algorithms. That's what they're for. They're to really increase your capacity to have precision over one type of model. Now, it's not as simple as you see just what you want, right? Because there's also a type of thing that's generally pushed more than other things. But nonetheless, the algorithm is still trying to make you go in a direction. So it's a push and pull, right? Are you familiar with Samuele Colu's work? He was at the consciousness conference. He was also with Lawrence at the SPA conference, and he's working on connecting active inference to the TikTok algorithm and seeing how it forces us to feel a certain way and therefore kind of takes over into our model, like forces us into a model. And I think it's not as simple as just the TikTok forces us. I think it's a push and pull, but I do think it lines up with your idea of increasing velocity. But I think that makes sense, right? If you have obviously the rate's going to go down as you get closer to the attractor. So yeah, I think that's these would be interesting papers. As far as simulating it, we would have to start with something very simple, and it's always the problem, right? Because that's what we did with the epistemic communities paper. We wanted to simulate this notion of scripts and how they emerge, etc. But we had to start with one very simple thing, which is, do you change your beliefs given a group and evidence, and are you capable of mapping a certain kind of evidence to a certain kind of model, given that you're in contact with people who also do this mapping? So it's kind of the same as the paper with birds was like on a larger scale. And I do think that this notion of power that you just discussed with like precision, right? Power is basically having the capacity to push out this amount of precision and therefore attracting things towards you. And so we could couch many things in terms of what is evidence of precision. So like money is evidence of precision, right? We value money a lot, and therefore if you have a lot of money, your model's probably pretty good. And if I hear you a lot on social media, or if you project a certain kind of confidence, these are all things that correlate with and power. So we get then into like these injustice, the epistemic injustice, right? Our capacity to even have the words, to project precision and therefore pull on the attractors. And we get into the notion of erasure. Certain terms are no longer even used, or you can't map like a person within the category they would need to be mapped in, and therefore they completely cease to exist and they can't become an attractor. Anyway, there's lots to talk about, but I think we're getting towards the end. But yes, I think these would be interesting papers, and I would love to couch a very simple first model to like start, and then maybe add in different scales at which the same process happens, and see how various scales can transcend, or how momentum can be built through the dynamical system and expand from something that seemed very small but go all the way to higher scale. So, you know, dynamical systems. I think that would be an interesting paper indeed.
Yes, absolutely. I hear you when you say you've got to start simple, and that is certainly true. But I do think it's worthwhile taking the next steps beyond simple. You know, because you know having a proof of concept, a quantitative formal proof of concept can sometimes lend your argument a certain power, which is undeniable. And it's not, you know, if you just think about the efforts made to model spread of viruses during the coronavirus crisis, you know, these kinds of models, they're difficult to craft and they're difficult to sell, and very difficult to invert. But if you can do it, they can be very powerful. You know, just as sort of, I repeat, quantitative formal ways of showing people what could happen if this and if that. I think so. I would encourage you to move beyond simple and or perhaps make things simple by casting everything in terms of masses and the like. That's another mean field trick which physicists like. Excellent. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. Are you still here, Lance?
Yes, he's here. I hope he's here. Yes, there he is.
I had one last kind of open question. Maybe it's for Mao, maybe it's for Karl, maybe it's for someone else. If we have time, do we have time for one last question?
Well, it's up to you, Karl.
Is it? I thought it was up to you.
Well, go ahead, Maxwell.
Okay. My question is, what specifically can it mean to come to share a generative model in this context? I ask because you know, there are two relevant models in the kind of variational inference setup that we use. The generative model, which describes the dependency structure of the entire system and the variational density, which basically harnesses our approximate posterior belief. My question is, could we think of two different kinds of sharing a generative model that might relate directly to the weak script versus strong script distinction? I'm kind of thinking like sharing a generative model might mean that you and I literally come to share the same dependency structure. It might also mean that you and I arrive at the same kind of posteriors reliably. So, I mean, my hunch is that one entails the other, but it would be good maybe to talk about this, especially in connection to this weak versus strong script dichotomy that's been presented.
If you want my view on that, I think literally what we've been talking about is actually sharing a generative model with certain other people. But also remember, this generative model is deeply contextualized, so I can share with a number of different people, provided that there is a shared frame of reference and a shared narrative there, and all I have to do is to infer what kind of person are you, so that I can condition all of my communicative and belief structures on that shared kind of person, so that we're both singing from the same hymn sheet. To do that, I have to be able to recognize you're that kind of person, and furthermore, that that kind of person means the same to me as to you. So I think you when you say a shared generative model, I think that's absolutely crucial. There has to be a shared frame of reference that can only come from mutual learning. So I didn't really think that it could be any other way. The interesting thing, of course, is that as you come to share, and maybe asymmetric with a powerful, precise generative model, seducing and drawing towards it a less precisely held or younger generative model, but whatever, that convergence will be the distributed learning, the federated learning. That would be the emergent property of coming to share and learning to share. The strong versus weak dichotomy, I would have guessed, and I'm just thinking off the top of my head, if the weak one is this basically a list of characteristics that define a particular type without specifically worrying about the enacted realizations to arrive at those particular characteristic outcomes. What I think you're saying here is that that lives in the characteristic, in the states that characterize this kind of person, or in the constraints, or in the C matrix. And then that begs the question, can we learn our characteristics and our constraints, and can we come to share the characteristics, which basically, can I learn to prefer what I think you prefer, so that we both prefer the same things, and possibly it's only in our in-group that sharing is is evinced. I could share, I could have other preferences, I can learn other preferences when talking to other people, and all I have to do is recognize the context I'm in to get the right preferences. But what that says is that you can, I think, adopt or absorb the weak reading of scripts into the strong reading simply by specializing the shared learning of generative models to the constraints or prior preferences that are conditioned upon or contextualized upon the kind of person that I am in this context. So again, it would be really nice to it would be very nice to actually simulate that, and to show that not only can you share an understanding of the way that the world works, and then come to literally have an isomorphism in the structure of the generative models, but that also includes my preferences, what I believe are characteristics of me, and the kind of thing that I am in this given context, that would also now become a shared frame of reference. So that would be the sort of the weak reading, or just focusing on those bits that don't actually commit to a mechanics of action, action and discourse and hermeneutics or active inference or whatever. Does that make sense?
Absolutely, that was super helpful. Thank you.
Thanks, Maxwell. Thanks, Karl, and thanks, Mao. Can we all unmute our microphones to give Mao a round of applause?
Woohoo! Yeah, thanks, Mao. That was a great presentation. You're really in command of your material, and it was very instructive. So.
Great. Mao, I'll follow up with a link to the recording, and if you want to do like something else, like put it on a different channel with just the talk, let me know.
Awesome.
Right. Thank you very much. Take care.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Great. Bye-bye.